Powder keg of Europe, a term that you may have heard before, describing the rather explosive nature of the Balkans. What you maybe are not aware of is the origin of this term. It all started with this crumbling empire, the sick man of Europe. Boo! Yes, I know. While the Western powers were too busy modernizing, colonizing, and industrializing, the Ottoman Empire was too busy trying to get out of the Stone Age. Seriously, these guys built absolutely nothing. No roads, no railroads, no air fryers, nothing. Oh, and they were losing a shit ton of territory. First Greece in 1821, followed by Romania, Serbia and Montenegro after the Russo-Turkish War of 1877-78, where the Ottomans were absolutely curb-stomped. Russia was looking at Constantinople while smacking their lips. Lastly, it was Bulgaria in 1908. Not to mention Albania was also having a couple of revolts around that time. The writing was on the wall. Things were about to happen. The Ottoman Empire was on its deathbed. The Undertaker had already prepared the casket. In the meantime, Montenegro, Serbia, Bulgaria and Greece decided that it was finally time to take up arms and liberate the Balkan Peninsula from all the Ottoman and Ottowomen once and for all. Thus, in 1912, the Balkan League was created. There was just a tiny problem though. While the main goal was to kick out the Ottomans, there was no actual agreement over the way they would split the land amongst themselves. And obviously claims overlapped because of historical claims. You know, the typical Balkan stuff. Oh, this land is mine because my ancestors took a shit here. Thus it's mine, okay? Wait, where's Montenegro? Montenegro had already declared war on the Ottoman Empire, attacking the city of Shkodra in northern Albania and the Sanjak region. Thus, in the 8th of October 1912, a Balkan War officially started. Some sources say September 25, but that's because they used the stupid old calendar. A week later, the remaining Balkan League forces sent an ultimatum to the Ottoman Empire. Surrender or we will change your pronouns to was where. The Ottomans replied by telling them to shove that ultimatum where the sun doesn't shine. The stage was now set. Power of friendship versus the forces of evil. The Ottomans set up headquarters in Constantinople, Skopje and Thessaloniki. That's where most of their troops were stationed. Now one would think, how in the fuck will a bunch of cattle farmers with firearms defeat a 600-year-old empire? Well, there are some important pieces of context missing. For starters, the Ottomans were in a conflict with the Italians, focused in Libya and the Dodecanese Islands. They officially lost those territories just 10 days after the Balkan War started. Secondly, the Young Turk Revolution took place 4 years prior, establishing a constitutional monarchy, a regime that was rather unstable. Lastly and most importantly, most of the Ottoman population lived on the Asian part of the empire. So obviously getting troops to where they needed to be would take a bit of time. Transporting them by ships through the Aegean Sea would help, and they lost the Aegean Sea to the Greeks. Whoops. As a result, the forces of the Balkan League were vastly superior in numbers to those of the Ottomans. Now, let's see what's happening in the other theaters. The Serb forces moved south to Skopje and Monastir, later moving to modern-day Albania with the goal of getting access to the Adriatic coast. Meanwhile, combined Serb and Montenegrin forces took over Kosovo. Bulgaria went full throttle towards Constantinople, or Tsarigrad as they called it. They got stopped right at the outskirts, but they did take over pretty much all of Thrace and some of Eastern Macedonia. The Greek army continued onward to Salonika, where the Turkish authorities surrendered the city to them, much to the dismay of a Turkish swimming instructor who was born there, and the king of Bulgaria who really wanted the city to become Bulgarian. Hopefully they don't overreact. They also took over the city of Ioannina. Yeah, safe to say the Ottomans were getting a generational ass-whooping. Eventually the Great Powers intervened, and on May 30, 1913, the Treaty of London was signed, officially ending the First Balkan War. The title says Balkan Wars, plural. Obviously, this Balkan event was so successful that a sequel started brewing immediately. The results of the war were pretty obvious based on the map. The Ottoman Empire would lose all of its territory west of the Enes Kilikoi line, including all but 2 of its Aegean islands, which were now given to Greece. But it gets worse. Because of the countless atrocities committed by all sides during the Balkan War, the Ottoman Empire saw a huge influx of refugees. Hopefully they won't hold a grudge. Pretty much every territory lost by the Ottomans was given to the Balkan League, except for Albania, which now became its own independent state. And Albanians, despite not being involved in the Balkan Wars, did not have a very good time. I mentioned previously that they were revolting against the Ottoman Turks, but then all of a sudden, the Balkan League showed up and did very demonetizable things. Well, let bygones be bygones. As for the actual spoils of the Balkan League, there was still the question over who would get what. The only actual agreement made before the war was between Serbia and Bulgaria, who had signed a treaty defining their borders in Macedonia. But because Serbia lost its conquered territories in Albania, they wanted a bit more of Macedonia, so they signed a pact with Greece. This obviously angered the Bulgarian side, who saw this as a betrayal. In their mind, they deserved the biggest piece of the pie, because they had the biggest force, suffered most of the casualties, and their victory at the siege of Adrianople or Edirne, albeit with the help of Serbian forces, massively defined the outcome of the conflict. Since the Bulgarians were ready to throw hands for what they wanted, the stage was set yet again for a certified Balkan classic. The sequel comes out on 29 of June 1913. Damn, not even a month later. The Tsar of Bulgaria, aka King, ordered the army to attack Greek and Serbian forces, without consulting the government or declaring war. The very next night, Serbian forces were attacked in Bregalnica River and Greek forces were attacked in Nigrita. Yeah, that's a real place. The Bulgarian army was halted, and what followed next was a bit of back and forth. You can see here on this map all the battles. Oh, look at them go. That's a lot of darts. It was all fun and games until the 10th of July, the day Romania, the Roman one in the Sea of Savages, cashed its permanent Balkan membership by declaring war on Bulgaria, advancing quite easily inland, because, you see, like its Tsar, Bulgaria was quite vulnerable from behind. This meant that Romania could get all the copper their hearts intended, and cholera. Apparently in the prequel, in the Thracian front, there was a cholera outbreak. The Romanian authorities blamed the Bulgarian population and Turkish POWs for this, and the Bulgarian authorities responded by calling the Romanian army dirty unwashed peasants. All this time, the Ottoman Empire was witnessing the events from afar. They thought that Bulgaria being on a 3v1 was quite unfair, so they decided to make it a 4v1 by attacking from the east. Technically it was a 5v1 because Montenegro was also involved, but they were just kinda there, ready for their eternal slumber once all of this was over. And over it was, quite quickly. By the 20th of July, negotiations had already started. On the 10th of August 1913, the Treaty of Bucharest was signed, officially ending the Second Balkan War. Borders were actually defined this time, and everybody lived happily ever after, for like a year until the Sarajevo incident. That, my friends, is why the Balkans were called the powder cake of Europe. The Balkan Wars were basically the prelude to the First World War. Although, in my humble opinion, the actual powder cake of Europe were the great powers. Let me explain. The Balkan Wars were caused by centuries of foreign rule and foreign intervention that had caused extreme nationalism to build up, basically creating a very volatile region that was a threat to the so-called Concert of Europe, which was an agreement between the great powers made after the end of the Napoleonic Wars that sought to maintain the European balance of powers, political boundaries and spheres of influence. Continue the status quo basically. But this Concert of Europe was quite hard to maintain, as the great powers had opposing interests. This becomes quite apparent on the reaction of the great powers to a prospect of a Balkan War. The Russian Empire was quite a big supporter of a war, even pushing for the creation of the Balkan League. Germany and the United Kingdom were officially opposed to a war, but secretly they kinda weren't. And lastly, France and Austria-Hungary strongly opposed the war, as they did not want to deal with any of that shit. Especially the demographic shit show that was Austria-Hungary, that saw Serbian expansion as a threat to its integrity. And well, we all know what happened next. The great powers were already preparing for a world war. They were just waiting for an excuse to dig trenches, throw chemicals at each other, and die of diseases. Yeah, that's the shit. Get it? Because when you get cholera, you shit like a lot and die. Anyway, the real powder cake were the great powers, and the excuse they were looking for was a spark that came from a gun of a Serbian peasant. This spark would set the powder cake ablaze.